become more, I guess, to develop your palate is to really, really think about what you're tasting. I think so often when people are tasting wine, they just kind of taste it and they kind of have the do I like it or not feeling. And obviously it's important for you to like the wine, but you should really think about why you like it and what senses that are intrigued by tasting it, by smelling it. But it's important as you drink wine, and I mean that's how you really become more educated in wine, is by tasting more and more wines and really trying to connect the dots on what you're tasting each time that you taste a different wine. And so just trying to make your brain remember the senses that you're experiencing is super important, and it's what makes wine really fun. And it's why it's so interesting for so many people, and that's why wines from all over the world, grown in all kinds of different places, are different, and vintages are different, and it's all fun and cool because no wine is the same. And just trying to like really connect the dots on what's different, what you like is kind of the fun thing for me to do.
For sure. For sure. Yeah. I mean, I talk to people all the time about tasting with intent, and just, more than just popping a bottle of wine and glugging it down and saying, I like that. Just think about like what it is that you're picking up so that you can remember that that's a bottle of wine that you like. And, whether it's a good quality bottle, an expensive bottle, a cheap bottle, as long as you can pick those things up and know what it is in that wine that you like, then you can kind of keep translating that and build on things. So, yeah, it's wine drinking is a lot of fun for sure. So, another question that we had come in, that we can probably kind of segue into, and then we'll get a little bit more into Texas specific. But another question we had was, what regions do you guys enjoy drinking wine from when you're not drinking Texas wine? So, Ben, I know you said you drink a lot of French wine naturally. Is there anywhere in particular in France that you particularly enjoy?
So lately we've been drinking a lot of Bendol, both on the white and on the rosé side. We're making more and more Mourvèdre for French Connections, grape that grows really well in Texas. So we got a visit about a year ago, or I guess, yeah, about a year ago. And we got to get a really great appreciation for a different style Mourvèdre. Like our style Mourvèdre in Texas is going to be what it is. It's just we're presenting the terroir of Texas, but trying to understand when you have a wine region that's really dedicated to the one varietal, there's a lot of stuff you can gain and learn from it. There's a lot of Mourvèdre expressions everywhere on the planet, but it's definitely like one that we've been drinking more lately than we've been in the past. The reds are just massive. Like it's actually hard to reconcile what Mourvèdre tastes like in Texas versus what Mourvèdre tastes like in Bendol. It's like opposite side of the spectrum in terms of like, it's so light in Texas, just very like earthy, herbal, just light body, fruit driven wines, and there's so massively structured reds in France. So that's probably the one we're drinking the most right now. That's a lot of fun to discover. It's a region that probably I've not spent as much time as it deserves. So a lot of fun to explore.
Awesome. Yeah, I actually, when I was in Austin last, I went into Austin Wine Merchant and got all three versions of the Tempier. I got the red, the rosé, and the white, and I just I can't find them like here in Fredericksburg that often. So I'm between like wanting to pop them because I love them and also wanting to hold on to them because I'm afraid to never get them again. Andrew,
yeah, what Tempier is distributed in the US is definitely like it's still definitely hard to get. It's like Tempier, people fight for those. So once you have them in your cellar, it's probably deserving of on the red side for sure. But even the rosés, like when we were out there last year, they were serving us rosés that were 3, 4, 5 years old.
Yeah.
So they're designed for aging. So
no doubt.
Very different approach.
For sure. Andrew, region or two that you outside of Texas that you really dig on?
I would say that I've probably outside of Texas have drank the most wine from either, I mean, outside of like the domestic wines, definitely the Rhone wines kind of always appeal to me for various reasons. It's kind of like what made me super interested in growing those grapes here in Texas. But I have found myself drinking a lot of like Austrian white wine right now. So I don't know why. It's just kind of coming into the season. You see the sun, and just something with a super acid driven and something you can enjoy a little bit chilled outside. It's kind of really speaking to me right now.
Yeah, huge fan of Austrian wines, both the whites and the reds. I think that they bring like such interesting wines to the table from kind of both sides of the spectrum, with all kinds of different fun grapes that we don't have here in Texas. So that's always cool to check out. Mike, what are you on, man?
Let's see. I've got to say, I guess maybe domestically, the Central Coast of California holds a special place in my heart. Grew up going out there every summer. My parents would go like wine tasting, and that kind of got me into wine, from a younger age, at least just appreciating like the smells and the visuals and stuff like that. Also, having, just going out there more recently, and as, into my, more recent years, I guess, they definitely share similar winemaking styles as we do. They make Rhone varietals in the lighter styles like us. They make Tannat. They make, hotter climate, hotter weather varietals. And so definitely like going out there. Mitch, as you know, we had a trip planned for this June. We were going to go hit that up, and now that got turned on its head, just like the rest of this godforsaken year. And then let's see, internationally, I definitely agree with Ben and Andrew. They gave solid answers. Also, just to throw like an Italian hat into the ring, love from Verona, the Verona district, Valpolicella region, Amarone wines. If you find something classified as Amarone, it means it went through a process where it's, the clusters have been dried on straw mats, and they kind of raisin up before they make them. And it's a stellar way to make wine. It's always very yummy. So that's kind of a surefire winner in my book.
Yeah, man, I like what you said about the Central Coast, because if anybody out there is a kind of big Texas wine person, they come down to the Hill Country all the time, hit up the tasting rooms, love the wine, love the atmosphere and the experience that they get. I think that of all the places that I've visited wine region wise, that the Central Coast is the most similar to the Texas Hill Country in terms of just the experience you can have, the kinds of wine that you can get there. I think that Central Coast is, people all the time ask me about like, where should I go travel for wine? I hear all these great things about Napa, and I'm like, well, I mean, you could go to Napa, but I think the Central Coast brings a little bit more bang for your buck than the Napa Valley. So, and it's a little bit more similar here. But awesome. So speaking of Texas wine, we can get a little bit into the Texas wine general questions here. Had a question come through that I actually am really interested to hear all of y'all's responses to myself, and I feel like you might all have a little bit of a different answer, or I would guess that. And we'll start with Andrew. What do you feel like Texas wine industry will be known for? Ben mentioned like Australia, people synonymous with Shiraz. France has all of its different wine regions, but Bordeaux is Cab and Merlot, Burgundy is Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. Is there something that you think either broad or even more specific, grape varietal wise, that you feel like Texas will eventually become known for?
That is a very tough question. I think winemakers have been, or in the wine industry in general, has been kind of asking itself that for the past 15 years. And to be honest, I don't think we even know yet. We're a super young industry. There's so many different styles of wine being made, so many varieties that are being grown. I mean, I was looking back at some old notes actually this past week, just because we were doing barrel orders and just like what different programs we've kind of worked with across, the last like 5 years. And we've worked like with just our winery with like 19 different varieties. And like, that's insane for like any other like wine growing region and in the world. Like there's for one place, one house to work with that many varieties is kind of crazy. We've definitely like kind of refined that for like our programs and what we're doing. We work with now about 10 to 12 different varieties, which is still a ton. But I mean, we work with Italian grapes, Spanish grapes, obviously grapes from the Rhone Valley. I don't know. It's really hard to say. I mean, all three of the winemakers here, I know like Ben's, one of his brands is like from like more like Bordeaux driven, and then one's more Rhone driven. I mean, that's like one producer for doing wines from two totally different places, and two totally different styles. So I think it's tough to know. I think the biggest thing is for us to really, really continue to grow and become like to gain notoriety, we're going to have to be consistent. And I could tell you that there are definitely some varieties in the vineyard that are more consistent than in others. And that has proven pretty true for most of the like Rhone and Spanish varieties that like hotter climates, shorter growing seasons until this past year. And we're like kind of completely stunned at the grapes that took the heat that we experienced last year the worst. And so I don't know what that means for like the future. I mean, I don't know, like Texas weather is always going to be pretty unforgiving and unpredictable. So I don't know, we may be a region that's kind of known for like complete variation on what's good year to year. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but what I do know is like consistency across our programs and being able to produce good wine year in and year out across the board, not just like a few wineries. Like we need everyone to be able to produce good wines, and it takes consistency in the vineyards. And so what that really means, I know I didn't really answer the question very well, but that's kind of where it's at.
No, man, I think that's a great answer. I think it's a great answer. Ben, do you have a different answer, or do you feel the same way as Andrew?
I think Texas is going to be known for one thing. That's my view on this. So every time we talk to journalists, there's the questions like, what is Texas going to be known for in 10 years, 20 years? And they all expect us to become more of those old school wine regions where there's one or two varietals that dominate. I don't know. There's a lot of varietals I don't work with. I mean, also I already make a lot of different varietals between the two wineries, but at the same time, there's just a lot of varietals that are very happy in Texas are neither of those categories. Like I love the stuff that they do with Adianico in Texas. I don't work with it, but that's definitely suited varietal to our climate. There's tons of varietals that are suited both in Central Texas and in West Texas. State, like I think there's going to be diversity forever. The other factor to this that we tend to sell from tasting room versus selling wine from wholesale. So when the wine goes to distribution, there's a huge upside for a wine region to be known for one thing because it makes it easier to market, easier to explain. But since most of the wine in Texas sells through tasting rooms, there's actually an upside to diversity. So even when I go to Napa, and I've regret time when I go to Napa, there's a point in the day where I'm done drinking Cab. And when I get to dinner time, I don't love it anymore. Like, please bring me just anything. Like, bring me some Syrah, bring me Austrian whites, like just nice, chilled, high-acid wines. Just bring me a total change of pace. People get to come to our wineries. You know, they're going to come to us. They're going to taste all, like, Rhone varietals. Then they're going to go to, like, Lost Draw, taste something totally different. Astris, something different. So you can make a day out of it. Taste twice the same thing. So I think that can play as a strength. Even though it's not going to make the wine region as a region clear and crisp to explain, I think like long term is going to play in our favor in the sense that people like new things, people like having different experiences, and that diversity of the plantings in Texas will allow that.
Awesome, man. Thanks for the answer, Mike. Do you what are your thoughts on the situation?
Yeah, man. I mean, I don't know how I can say it any better than they did. I mean, just kind of playing off the diversity of the state. Like, I think if there was a general consensus and we all wanted to like make one grape, from here on out, like we could. There are a lot of varietals that do great here. But like Ben was saying, having the diversity is a really cool thing because you can go and have, a Dolcetto and then go down the street and have a Morvet and then go down the street and have a Cab Franc and go down the street and have a Chenin Blanc. And it's like, what other wine region is that happening in? That's a really cool thing. And it's cool for, it's cool to produce in that sort of environment. It's cool for people to come visit those sorts of places. And like Andrew said, it's a pretty young industry. People are still trying stuff. We love Montepulciano, we love Aglianico, like Ben was saying. You don't have to go too far back in the vintages to see the first time that those wines are produced in Texas. And who knows what the future holds. A lot of people are exploring Portuguese varietals that haven't gotten a ton of play yet. People are, like Andrew was saying, Spanish varietals are doing really great here and in the high plains. So, could we have a varietal like that? Sure. I don't know that we ever will, and I don't know that would be the most beneficial thing. I don't even think that there would be like a style, just between rosés, whites, and reds. There are a lot of great winemakers doing really great things across the board, and I'm excited to see that continue.
Sweet. Yeah, and I think one thing too that doesn't get thought a lot about when I forget it, I think it was Ben said that, the journalists are always asking, what varietals is Texas going to be known for? Mentioned kind of some of the regions of France, but if you think about it, the state of Texas is so large that we have such varied terroir all across the state that really our entire state could be kind of thought of as a country and have very different varying terroir where different grapes grow better in different places than others. So I think that also adds to the incredible variability of the Texas wine industry.
Yeah, down south in the valley, you're breaking bud around mid-February, and you're having like an early season. And then in Dalhart, those are the two extremes, I understand. But like to the other extreme, you're going to be breaking bud in May. So you have like a warm climate with a short season, late bud break, early first frost, and every shade of the rainbow in between. It's just absolutely incredible, like that you actually have like this in the same state.
What's the drive to Dalhart from Johnson City?
It's long. It's about like 9 hours.
Shit.
Feel free to come with me next time.
You can get pretty deep into Mexico in the same amount of time.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. So we had a couple other questions come through, but I'm going to kind of categorize some of those and bulk them into some other questions that I had already written down because they kind of are all similar. But what I want to do next here is I actually had a couple of questions. It actually worked out perfectly to where I have an individual question to be answered by each of you guys. And the first one I've got is for Andrew. So Andrew, on the 2018 Viognier that you guys did, on the back, you wrote something to the effect of wildly fermented or native fermented or something like that. I love wine. I love when I know that a wine is made with native yeast. So my question is that the first, because I haven't noticed it before on any of your other bottles, is that one of the first wines you guys did that with? How much do you see yourselves doing that in the future? And tell the folks out there a little bit about kind of why you would choose to do that.
Sure. So it's something that, we do from time to time, and honestly, we're moving more in that direction just because of how some of our lots have been coming in. So I think the 18 Viognier in particular was not inoculated. So when we say like native yeast or wildly fermented is a really kind of elegant way to say it, I guess. But that just means we actually did not start the fermentation process. It started on its own, and we just let it ferment all the way out. That particular wine was done in 3 different formats and then blended back. It was done in stainless, concrete, and in oak. And then we just kind of made a pretty cool little blend from the 3 for that vintage. And we'll probably do that going forward. That was like, that wine was one of probably maybe the best white wine we've done. And Brad really likes working with Viognier, and he does a really good job with it. And that was a really cool wine. But yeah, for the most part, there are definitely lots that we inoculate, and a lot of that is just for protection of the wine and for the fruit. Obviously there's times when we prefer to start that process to prevent anything like bad from taking over and starting to eat the sugar before the yeast does. And generally, we've kind of had a pretty cool system the last couple of vintages where we ferment about 90% of all of our red fruit in our oak uprights. If you've been to the winery, you've probably come to the production area at some point and seen them. But we turn those things over as many times as possible through the harvest season, and we're pretty adamant about trying to get all of our ferment done in it. We just really believe in the early oxygenation that you can really create and pumping over those oak tanks. And you really, really start to integrate oak tannin really early. And we use oak chips through the fermentation as well. But what we'll do is, even if we inoculate one lot to like kind of kick off the season, it's kind of wild. So the very first lot that came in last year for us was some Tempranillo out of the hill country, and it came in like July. So we fermented that, and then we pressed it out, and literally like the same day that night we picked some more fruit from the hill country. So we brought that in, pumped it right on top of the in the same tank, and it basically used the house yeast that was already like created. We didn't inoculate for like 4 or 5 lots behind it. We just kept throwing fruit right on top of the old one. And really, like for us, like our belief is that really kind of creates like a house like yeast, and so that you're using the same culture through multiple lots. And I mean, there's no way to really determine like what starts the fermentation process. Even though a lot of times, even if you do inoculate, there's a good chance that some of the yeast that has already started kicking is native or from the vineyard. But generally, like we try to be pretty low impact in all of our processes. So we don't inoculate a whole lot unless we feel like the fruit's going to make a long trip or sit a long time before it actually gets to us in the cellar. That answer the question?
Yeah, man, absolutely. I think that was a great answer. It's really cool to get a look into some of those processes. So appreciate the answer. Ben, my question for you, man, is some people, it's been mentioned a couple of times already, but some people watching may not know that you've got a couple of different wineries or wine labels. So you've got Calais, where you're working with the Bordeaux varietals predominantly, and you've got French Connection, who you're kind of representing in this Texas Wine United collaboration here, where you're focusing in on the Rhone varietals. So my question is, do you approach your winemaking? I mean, I know, again, the varietals are different. Do you approach your winemaking differently for French Connection versus Calais? And in particular, do you approach your barrel programs and how you're aging these wines differently from Calais to French Connection?
Yeah, it's very different. Bordeaux varietals love oxygen. Varietals, I'm gonna overarch on this, but like just all Rhone varietals don't like oxygen as much. And there's exceptions in there because there's a lot of different Rhone reds, but you don't want as much oxygen in your Rhones as you would in your Bordeaux's. So Calais is using a lot of new barrels, and all of them are 225 liters, and they're a Bordeaux style barrique. So just the classic, like, what do you think of a wine barrel? But for French Connection, most of what we do is in puncheons. So puncheons, they're all a bit more than twice as big as a rig. Factors to this. First, they tend to be varietals, so they don't need as much oak impact. But really, by doubling or more than doubling the volume, you're going to decrease the amount of oxygen the wines are going to see. So you can keep them in there longer without branding the wines, without getting oxidized characters in those wines. So we're trying to use as much punch as we can, and we're actually gonna go to even larger formats. So in the future, we're gonna be looking and getting like the traditional Bendel style aging, which is like, I don't know, like Foudres is what people call them out here. Like 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 liter containers. So less of oxygen, just to let those terroirs and vintages express themselves a bit more. Varietals just need to be guided a little bit more. Like we need to build body on the Bordeaux varietals. It's kind of a different goal. We want the wine to become big, where on a lot of the run varietals, we want to express as much nuance as possible. A small amount of oxygen for a longer period of time is better than a bunch more oak flavor, oak tannins in a shorter period of time. It would overwhelm the run varietals. So we have totally different programs between the two wineries on that, and going forward, larger and larger formats as soon as we can afford.
For sure. Awesome, man. That's really cool to hear. It's really interesting to see that you can take two pretty different approaches between your two different programs. So, Mike, we had somebody specifically asked, based off of a post of you out in the vineyard brushing buds. They were asking, what does that mean? So I've taken that question and morphed it into a bigger question, which is, tell people, I mean, definitely answer that question, but tell people a little bit about like what's going on in the vineyard down here. I mean, all three of you guys could probably answer this question, but we'd get a very, very similar answer because, you know, we're all seeing kind of a similar deal. But Mike, specifically for down here, since we have an estate vineyard down here in the hill country, tell people kind of where we are in the vineyard process right now, and what there was a question that just came through about the weather so far this year, and what you kind of, even though it's still pretty early, what are you kind of seeing as far as the weather and how that might affect the 2020 vintage for the hill country?
Well, so we had a very, very warm winter. And I mean, it actually kind of surprised me. I was expecting a pretty early bud break, but we had bud break 4 days earlier this year than we did last year. So not terribly different. It was like March 11th this year, March 15th last year. So we're about a month in, a little over a month in. We've got, you know, good growth in our shoots, little grape like pre-clusters forming, about to flower. And so, yeah, you know, really, it's definitely a fragile state. So those freezes that we were flirting with earlier this week, and especially up in the high plains, it was there's a lot of potential for them to get some really cold weather up there, and that would have been, you know, just with everything else that, you know, they're dealing with and that we're all dealing with, that would have just been terrible. But it looks like that was avoided, which is great because, you know, it's mid-April already. So we should be just about beyond, knock on wood, beyond, you know, when we would expect to get our last freeze. So in that picture, brushing buds, our vines are still relatively young, third, fourth leaf vines. They still push little buds out of their trunks. You know, after years of brushing them off, they kind of stop pushing there and focus all their energy up on the cordons and up. But we're still pushing buds on the trunks. So we got to brush those off about 3 times a season. We've made one sweep doing that, finished that last week. We're gonna drip a little bit of nutrients, and they usually respond by pushing more buds out of their trunks after we do that. So I imagine we'll be doing that later this month or early in May, as we start to kind of tuck all the growth up into the trellis wires and start shoot thinning to make sure that our fruit's getting enough air and sunlight, and so the crop is as good as it can be.
Sweet, man.
Yeah.
We just had a question come through that's somewhat related, and I don't know that this is a question that requires everybody to answer, but I also don't know who might be the best person to answer it. So I'll ask the question, and whoever can jump in quickest. What varietals have we found in Texas? So we talked about a little bit about how varied our grapes are that we have to work with here that do well. What are some varietals that we can go ahead and like cross off the list as we've been trying it and it just does not work here?
Man, that's a tough one. I mean, there are varietals that do well so infrequently that like I personally would cross them off. Like I don't think we'll ever have a Chardonnay program because, the odds of it ripening where you want it to ripen and to make a good wine is it's difficult in its year. So there are people that do it and do it well, and that's awesome. We're probably not going to be.
Actually very, very good at this. Surprisingly good at making Texas Chardonnay. Every good rule, exception. There's always going to be exceptions to things that we don't think are going to grow in Texas.
Yeah.
Yeah, like cold climate varietals is just not that many spots.
Yeah.
So.
Probably no Pinot. Probably, I mean, I can't say I remember the last time I had like a Texas Riesling, but
I think Lost Draw's got one of those.
We've used Riesling in one last year, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have. All of our Lost Draw fans are familiar with our Gemütlichkeit, which is a German-inspired wine. So we always use a Germanic kind of blend or grapes. That's what the Gruner is actually going to be used for this year. Yeah, I think it's tough to say because I think any variety that you throw out there and say is not going to work, like you're going to have somebody that's going to like, well, actually, this wine was really good. And I mean, there's definitely some that are not going to be standouts like year to year. And this kind of goes back to the whole consistency thing. So we have chosen not to work with grapes like Chardonnay. Like Pinot Noir would be one that I would say is probably not a great fit for multiple reasons. I would say Pinot Grigio, but we actually have Pinot Grigio at Lost Draw Vineyards. But there's just some that we choose not to work with because I feel like if you're trying to build programs and you're trying to hit that consistency standard that we've talked about a little bit earlier, then you're going to give yourself the best chance to succeed year in and year out with grapes that aren't those that I just mentioned. So that's just kind of the decision that we made. And sure, there's probably going to be years that something may work out. It's just I strive to make wines every year, and missing vintages, especially in programs, it hurts. And it really, especially when you actually create some kind of a following. I mean, every winery kind of does things a little different, but all of them identify with certain grapes to some extent. And if you're not able to kind of put those same wines out year in and year out, it's kind of an interesting way to try to make it all work, I think.
For sure.
No doubt. So, Andrew, you mentioned, you talked a little bit about the Gemütlichkeit blend, which I know differs for you guys. But we had somebody, a question come through on Facebook asking, kind of everybody can answer. And let's start with, I'll let Mike start with this one. So what are some blends, some interesting blends that you're working on right now that you're really excited about?
Interesting blends that we're working on that we're really excited about. Well, So I guess I'll give two. One that is in the bottle that we're about to release, and then one that we just made in the 19 vintage. So from our 2017 vintage, we put a little combo of some Italian varietals together. So it's like 45% Montepulciano, 45% Sagrantino, and then 10% Petit Verdot at the end. So it's a pretty cool. It's like a spicy but a little fruity, mostly Italian blend. That it really surprised me. I'm a pretty big fan of it. We'll be releasing that in like probably July, August, I would say. I'm calling it Montefalco because that is a blend that would come from the Montefalco region of Italy. And then for 2019, we got some really just stellar Bordeaux varietal grapes from the High Plains last vintage, from Newsom Vineyards and Nara Vineyards specifically. Been toying with the idea of doing a Cab Franc heavy blend. So I'm looking at like Cab Franc Tannat, maybe some Merlot. To kind of round it out, kind of a right bank, plus Tannat kind of blend.
Sweet.
Yeah,
Ben,
man.
what about you, man?
I mean, we've made a lot of first-time run varietals in 2019, so blending decisions we're a year away from making. Up to a few years ago, we made all the wines for French Connection at Calais, aka we didn't make a lot of wine, we didn't make a lot of varietals. So it was, do you want to put the Mourvèdre with a Syrah, or do we want to put the Syrah with Mourvèdre was the question. And now we have Counoise, we have Grenache, we have Syrah, we have multiple vineyards of Syrah, multiple vineyards of Mourvèdre. The oldest vines have like so many different components. Is really going to be how many of those we're going to end up making. The beauty of run varietals is that on the given year, if you have 5 or 6 of them, you're going to find a point. So we're talking about finding consistency. I think the reason why, like, we all love, I think everybody on this chat loves run reds. And there's just, it's always good. It's never the same, but vintage to vintage is always good. I think the big factor in that is that you just have the ability, when you have 13 base varietals out there, to just find a point of balance in between all those wines. Which one should be released as a variety and which one should be in blend. And they all bring something really interesting to the blend. Some are going to be just full-fledged earthy, some are going to be big bright fruit, and they're all something to commit to the blend. And so you're able to just find a beautiful point of balance. I think a winery in California does it really well, Established Creek, where they have three different blends that they make every single year, come from a different perspective. And so they're always beautiful wines. Some are designed for aging, some are designed for drinking. There's just a lot of avenues with even just one set of varietals. So it's something that we're growing into. We're still making those final decisions, but I'm really excited about, like, the one that tastes probably the best at this point is the one that I've never really wanted to make, is Grenache. The Grenache from 2019 is just opulent and delicious, and by the time it went to the punch lines, it wanted to give you its best. This is going to be a really interesting blending component for that.
Awesome, man. That's cool. Yeah, it's fun, the Rhone varietals, because, like drinking something like Chateauneuf du Pape or most specifically Chateauneuf du Pape, but I mean, it's like you can tell the different ones that are a little bit more fruit driven, a little bit more earth driven, and then you look and see what the blends are, and you can kind of pick out the producers that you like based off of knowing that they use more of this versus that, if you like earth versus fruit or whatever. So that's always a lot of fun.
And our Syrah from Newsom, so we get Syrah from Newsom Vineyard, and in some years is going to be all the way like Australian style with just gigantic fruit. And there's going to be years where it's going to be just like very Chateauneuf, very Côte Rôtie, just totally herbaceous, just it's very old school. And then there's vintage in between, but a lot of the time it goes to the extremes of just all the way to one edge, all the way to the other edge, depending on what the weather was in Texas in the middle of ripening period. Like those last 60 days just are huge overwhelming factors in the wine style at the end. So I think the interesting part is that those will not react the same way 2 years in a row in Texas.
Awesome. Andrew, do you guys have anything fun, exciting blends coming out that you really like?
Yeah, just speaking of blends in general, I think that everyone, especially if you drink Texas wine, you should really embrace red blends. And like we talked about earlier, like you're gonna have a hard time finding certain grape varieties that do great every single year. And while I know that a lot of people really enjoy like certain varieties for certain different reasons, blending in the lab and in the winery is like one of the best tools for winemakers. And it helps to like express a certain site. Like my favorite thing to do is take varieties from one single site and make a blend from it. And you can really kind of build the wine, but still stay true to the terroir and to the vineyard where it was grown. But I mean, blending in general is something that as Texans we should really embrace, because it's a way that we can take different facets and different pieces in any given vintage, any given year, and make a wine, build a wine that's pretty consistent and pretty good and easy to drink. With that being said, like we actually started a GSM program a couple vintages ago, which I was super excited about. I love working with those 3 grapes. But this past year, Grenache, just like Ben was talking about, it's not always the easiest to work with, not the easiest to grow, even in Texas, which is kind of surprising given how most Rhone varieties are pretty successful year in and year out. And we ended up pressing off all of our Grenache in 2018 for rosé, and it made a great rosé, but we had some really just kind of inconsistent ripening and never really got a lot of it ripe. So it just kind of made a really good candidate for rosé anyway. So we ended up replacing the Grenache in our GSM with Counois. And it actually surprisingly hit a very similar profile to the previous vintage. We called it our CSM. So if you're in our wine club, you just got one of those, and it's a really fun wine. It's a Counois Syrah Mourvedre. So it kind of hits that Chateauneuf du Pape style of just a bunch of different Rhone varieties, that varying percentages year in and year out depending on the producer. But yeah, it's a fun one. It's pretty good.
Nice.
Sweet.
To borrow that.
What's that?
I'm getting to borrow that.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah.
So I've got a question that I think that I want to ask. One of the questions that we got, because I think it'll be a really nice lead in to a second question. And I'll start with Ben. I know that you've been working in the Texas wine industry for a while. And this was a question we got like last week from somebody. Do you find that there is a general Texas wine drinkers palate that is different from other people's palate, I guess, around the country or around the world? Do you find that Texas wine drinkers like something more specifically than what some other wine drinkers around the world might be into?
That's an interesting question. I think there's definitely a Texas wine palate. I think there's a lot of people in Texas that drink a lot of Texas wine, not only because they want to like support the industry, but because they actually like genuinely enjoy like the style that comes out of Texas. We're a hot climate, so we have like, no matter where you are in Texas, you're in a hot climate. So there's a definitive sense of style that's going to come out of a hot climate. You can pick early, you can pick late, you can be more acid driven, more fruit driven, depending on like all those just vineyard and picking decisions. But and some winemaking decisions, but just overall, like climate is going to define exactly where you're going to end up. But I don't know. I don't know that the palate for Texas wine is not going to translate to liking other wine regions, because there's other warm wine regions where there's going to be just similar styles. If you put the same varietals in different terroirs, it's going to have a slightly different expression, but there's still going to be like, I think like climate is the number one expression of terroir. And so if you have a similar climate, ours is erratic. So this is just the way it is. But I think if you grow grapes in a slightly similar soil, in a slightly similar climate in different part of the world, you're going to have like you're going to have a lot of common characteristics, like Syrah from a cold climate, Syrah from a cold climate, Syrah from warm climate. It's going to taste like Syrah from warm climate. It's going to be refinement off that, but I think there's a lot of wine regions to explore. But if you're a big Texas wine drinker, there's definitely some warmer wine regions that you're probably going to get attracted to. So like the one for me that I think would be interesting in France for people that like Texas wine would be Languedoc-Roussillon. So the southwest part of France going towards Spain. I think that'd be like a wine region that grows a lot of the same varietals. Not as well known, like probably an underdog like Texas. I think that'd be and wines that are generally cheaper, like more affordable. That I think a lot of people really enjoy exploring. It's a beautiful wine region to visit too. Like it's not super touristy, so it's a really interesting wine region for people that want to go to France, that want to go to Paris and be in the big city. This is beautiful place to go in social distance. There's not that many people out there.
Nice.
For sure. Mike, I know you work the tasting room, man. What about you? What do you see as far as Texas wine palates?
I would say it's all across the board. I mean, you've got sophisticated wine drinkers. I mean, I've got people that come in and they're like, get ready to impress me. I drink first growth Bordeaux, and there are people that come in and it's their first time tasting wine. So, I mean, I don't think there is necessarily a consistent palate. One thing I've seen, over the years and that I absolutely love is, more than a consistent palate is a consistent state pride. And, people wanting to give wine a chance because it's from Texas and, because they're from Texas and they want to drink Texas wine made, with Texas fruit from, Texas winery. And so it's definitely cool when, people are like, it's like, yeah, I've never drunk wine before, but we wanted to drink wine. And so we came to the Hill Country to drink wine. I mean, there are people with palates for sweeter wine. There are people for palates with, only white wine, only red wine. Yeah, people that go nuts over rosé and bubbles, and kind of like we were talking about earlier, the diversity of the varietals that we grow and the producers that are here. It's just pretty awesome that you can if you had just the most bizarre assortment of wine drinkers in a group, taking a trip throughout the Texas Hill Country, you could hit some sparkling wine, you could hit some sweet wine, you could hit people that are known for incredible whites and rosés, people that have big bold reds. Just the options are endless, and that's a really cool thing. So yeah, I'd say that's kind of what I would go with, rather than a consistent palate. The consistency in seeing people want to drink Texas wines because they're from Texas, and how kind of, I mean, that's very cool to see, and I really appreciate it.
Andrew, would you concur?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, like, generally just kind of speak a little differently than same answer. I think that wine culture in general in Texas it's a newer thing, and you definitely have like a this newer generation that is really starting to explore different wines and is very interested in like beverages in general. And I think that's really cool, but it's very easy to see. I mean, like the possibility of like just is kind of endless for Texas. I know that even in the region that I grew up in the High Plains and for most of West Texas, like anywhere north of like I-20, like we just were like, they just passed laws like in the 2000s, like in the last 20 years that allowed you to even like buy alcohol in some counties. And so I think that I mean, we're super young industry, and it's I mean, I know a lot of Texans were raised on Dr. Pepper and sweet tea, and now we're kind of introducing a beverage that's interesting, and we're refining palates. But I think our biggest responsibility as a wine region and a wine industry in Texas, as winemakers and wineries across the state, is just be educational, like with what you're doing, and have intent in what you're doing, and let people know like why you're growing certain grapes or why you're working with certain wines and why it's different here than it is in other places. And we have like such an opportunity to talk to this whole new generation that is so interested in wine. And it's really cool. And in Texas, we're getting a lot of people that are moving in to Texas from other parts of the country and even the world. I mean, it's no secret that we are a growing population. And so with it comes a lot of more refined palates, or people that wine as a cultural thing was a bigger part of their lives for a longer period of time. But we have such an opportunity to just kind of be like just educational and for this new generation, and really build a kind of collective like fan base of what we're doing here. And just there's no better way to like really support your industry than to drink the wine that's grown locally. So that's so I guess all I got to say.
Andrew, I'm going to actually let you keep going here because you segued perfectly into the last kind of serious question that I have for you guys. I know we're coming up on an hour here, and thanks to everybody who's hung with us for the full hour. And for those of you who are still here, we're going to be wrapping up shortly. But Andrew, I love that you touched on the fact that the Texas wine kind of drinker is kind of a relatively new drinking wine is a very relatively new thing for Texans. And because of that, they're constantly kind of evolving the things that they're wanting to see and the things that they're wanting to drink. So as a winemaker, and I'll let all of you answer this, but Andrew, I'll let you keep rolling. What are some kind of, are there any kind of trends? And I know trend is it kind of got a negative connotation to it because nobody wants to say, yeah, we're chasing trends. But are you guys seeing any trends or processes, styles, anything like that? Orange wine, sparkling wine, pet nat, blending of certain things. Any kind of trends that you're seeing as a winemaker that you guys are kind of embracing and kind of running with?
I mean, I think it's no secret that rosé has become a really popular thing. Every single winery in this state in particular is making rosé that I've been to. And I don't know that that's a trend that will really die out in Texas. I mean, if you think about the varieties that are successful here, and just the general climate and the like atmosphere that we are consuming wine now, and like a lot of people are like really getting outside and doing things outside and being more adventurous and hanging out outdoors. And you got to have something that's a bit refreshing if you're gonna consume wine at 95-degree weather. And I don't think it's something that's going to go away. I think it's something that Texas should really embrace. A lot of our cuisine that we eat is very rich food and also like very easy food to have with rosé, and like casual food, like sophisticated cuisine. It all goes good with rosé. So I don't know that that's necessarily a trend, but I think it's something that I think Texas should definitely embrace. And I think it's no secret that Texans are consuming a lot of rosé. I mean, we've made more and more rosé every year that we've been around, and I've kind of seen the same trend amongst most wineries out there up and down in Texas.
For sure, for sure. It's personally, I love to say that I think that I have seen that evolution take place over the last like 10 years. I mean, I was living in Dallas, 10 years ago, and I was starting to drink rosé, and it felt like I was having to convince all my friends that rosé was like a cool thing to drink. And then all of a sudden, everybody jumped on rosé, and now it's like commonplace. It's not weird to see a rosé at a tasting room or an entire shelf at the liquor store full of rosés that are not sweet and that are, can be complex and can be casual, but are all really freaking good. So yeah, no, it's been a cool thing to see for sure. Mike, what about you, man? Any trends that Astris is kind of jumping on?
I wouldn't say, I mean, kind of like Andrew was saying, not necessarily trends, but I think that the growth of the Texas wine industry is partly like exhibited by the different things that are being tried and like discovered. I mean, you mentioned what you were drinking earlier, the concrete Morvet. I know Andrew's got a bunch of concrete eggs that they age wine in. That's not like a trend. It's something that's done in a specific region that wasn't like widely publicized. And it's like, hey, we have similarities with them. Let's age wine like they do. And it's like learning from people that have been there before, you've got like Pet Nat. I don't know if we'll make a Pet Nat or when we'll make a Pet Nat, but it's cool that people are using a very, very old method to make sparkling wine out of varietals that do really well here in Texas. Again, that's kind of taking a peg from, other places that have similar climates and similar grape varietals that are growing here and saying, what are they doing? And, oh yeah, we could do that too. And let's give it a shot. Learn, don't reinvent the wheel. Learn from the people that are doing it and have been doing it for hundreds, if not thousands of years. So, I think we'll be doing more of the same. I definitely want to experiment with different, barrel aging formats, like Ben was talking about with pumpkins and founders and all those good things. That's one of the fun things about winemaking is there's infinite possibilities to do the same thing. I mean, if you deliver 4 tons of Morvet to 10 different winemakers, you could literally have thousands of possibilities as far as how you're going to ferment it, how you're going to age it, how you're going to, every step of the process could be different for every one of those winemakers. So it's great to learn from people that have done it before and that have been doing it for years and years and years. And who knows what the future holds. It's going to be awesome.
For sure. Absolutely, man. Great answer. Ben, anything you're looking to?
I think the one thing that we're looking to do at French Connection is have some lighter body reds that are suited to both Texas cuisine and Texas climate in general. Just gets hot in the middle of winter, gets hot really quick in the spring. We eat a lot of brisket. We eat a lot of fattier things that have been put on a grill that have like big bold flavors, and it's hot outside, so we might not always feel like drinking the really big, heavy reds. So we started making Counoise, started making Grenache. There's a lot of varietals that are on the run side that will give you that lighter body style, more like easy drinking, easy going, ready to go. Like doesn't have to stay in the cellar for a few years. It's actually like when we put it out, just good to go. So that's probably what I'm looking forward to the most. I just think that I think it's like rosé. It's not really a trend. I think it's just going to be there to stay. It's just going to make sense based on what we eat, what we drink, and the climate in Texas. I just think that's something that's going to become natural, just as lighter body reds, they're just ready to go when they're bottled. Maybe 12 months, 15 months in barrel, something like that. Shorter programs, not as oak impacted, just showing like tons of fruit, really interesting wine. So that's really what I'm looking forward to. At this time of year where it's warming up and I'm working outside, I try to work outside most this time of year so that I don't have to the rest of the year when it really gets hot. But it feels hot right now. We're not adapted yet to this climate.
For sure. We actually had a question come, or not even a question, just a comment come through last week that said something to the effect of, I really love light, chillable red wines. Would you agree? And I think we could all probably agree that we do enjoy those kinds of wines for sure.
Yeah,
so
I mean, like Cru Beaujolais, like Grenache, it's not because it's light and drinkable that it has to be not complex. Like, it's not. Like, people just think it's one or the other, but you don't have to trade one for the other. When it's well executed, you can actually get both in the same bottle. There's definitely a learning curve to making those wines. So you need to put some thought into it and rework your programs out so that you can really get the best out of those varietals. But I think Texas is going to be known for some of those styles because it makes a lot of sense. It just makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely. Well, guys, we're a little past the hour here. And for those of you who are still watching, thanks again for sticking with us. I've got one last question for these winemakers on a little bit of a non-wine related note, just to close us off. And we'll do it in the original order here. So, Andrew, what are you doing right now in quarantine that is not, don't tell me you're working in the winery and all that vineyard and all that fun stuff. What are you doing in like the little bit of off time that you have that's fun and entertaining, keeping yourself from going crazy during quarantine?
Well, I mean, more than anything, it's kind of cool. I've gotten to spend a lot more time with my kids. So that's been great. I've watched way too many Netflix shows. Like, we did the whole Tiger King thing, and I don't know. I've watched more TV, I feel like, in the last 2 months than I have in the last 2 years, and none of it was sports, which, if you know me, that's kind of a crazy thing. So yeah, we're doing that. Just hanging out with kiddos. I've figured out that life has blessed my wife. She's at home with a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a not even 1-year-old. So yeah, it's been interesting times.
Yeah, man. Awesome. Ben, what about you, man?
I spend about 10 to 12 hours a day on the backhoe. That's literally most of my day spent on the backhoe. So we're laying infrastructure for vineyard. We're laying irrigation pipes, all that good stuff. So when the sun goes up, we get on the backhoe, and it never ends. It never ends. And we're trying to bottle wine. We're trying to have wine in the bottle when we reopen. We always run out of wine at Calais. So we're trying to actually be ready when we reopen, since we stopped basically like selling wine for a little while. We're still selling wine like to go pick up, but it's not the craziness that it usually is. So we're actually trying to get our ducks in a row so that when we reopen, we know it's going to be an onslaught, and we want to be ready for it this time. So yeah,
are you playing?
I have seen Tiger King too, but I definitely don't feel like I've seen a whole lot of Netflix in this period.
Nice. Ben, are you playing next year?
I don't know. I don't know if we're gonna get there. I would like to say yes, but I don't want to say we're gonna do it and then we're not gonna do it. So we're gonna be playing it within 2 years for sure. I don't know if we're going to be able to get what we want next year, or if we're going to have everything ready for next year. We have 4 blocks. We've decided, based on trenching across the property, we're going to split the blocks a little bit differently. That's the beauty of just trenching 8 feet down in the ground. You get to see like the full soil profile, and I think we're going to change the way we had the blocks laid out. So we need to send it to a lab and see if we need to change the blocks, or if we can still get away with just having 2 different blocks. I think we're going to end up with 4 instead of 2, which is really weird. It's a small property. We're going to put 2.5 acres of vineyard, but we're trying to get it right the first time so we don't have to replant the second time.
That's a good thing.
Yeah.
Cool.
I don't know that you can get it right the first time, but we're going to try.
Yeah, man. I mean, same over here. Getting to spend a
Tiger
lot of
King.
Tiger King. Watch Tiger King. God, I feel like that was a month ago now.
Yeah.
Sounds like it.
Um, Kristen and I have been trying to watch like movies. We don't get a lot of time for movies during the week, so we've tried to dedicate a little bit of time for that. Watched Jojo Rabbit last night. Highly recommend. We watched something like a week ago. That was pretty good. It is escaping me right now.
That's good.
Rogers, you just said.
What was it?
Mr. Rogers.
That was it. Yeah. Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood or whatever. Tom Hanks. Good stuff.
Yeah. So old reruns of Mr. Rogers, the TV show.
Yeah. No, it was good. The format they did that in, it was like the best way to make him look cool.
Awesome. Yeah, personally, I'm all caught up on the Marvel comic universe, which I did not really see any of up until about the last 2 weeks. So was stoked to get caught up on those.
Nice.
Cool. Well, for everybody who's still logged in here with us, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to the winemakers, Ben, Andrew, Mike. Thanks, guys, so much for taking the time to do this for everybody watching. I guess I could kind of throw it to you guys to just kind of say goodbye real quick. So starting with Andrew, if you just want to say your goodbyes.
Yeah. Thanks for watching. Definitely, there's tons of ways to support us and support the community. Get out there, drink Texas wine.
Awesome, Ben.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for watching. Thanks for supporting us past 12 years, and looking forward to having the wineries back open pretty soon, I hope.
No doubt. Mike.
Absolutely. Thanks for watching, guys. Look forward to seeing you in the tasting room when wineries reopen. Until then, do support us by buying online and by tuning into stuff like this. Thanks.
Awesome. And again, if there was anybody who's watching now towards the end who didn't catch the majority of this, or who didn't catch last week's, I've got last week's up on my YouTube. So the Liquid Culture, and I'll go ahead and throw this recording up to that as well, so you guys can see it. And of course, this one will be up for the next, I think, like 24 hours on Facebook, so you can log back on and see anything that you guys missed. So again, my name is Mitchell Chirac, and for all these guys here, thank you everybody for joining us and tuning in and supporting the Texas wine industry. Y'all stay safe.
Thanks, guys.